Okay, hello. It's book club time.
Welcome to the Midnight Book Club, our very second episode.
Wow.
Um, couldn't you believe it? We're being consistent.
That's
we are.
shocking.
I've never been consistent ever in my life. We're your hosts, Lucy.
Oh, and me. Hello.
And today we are going to talk about Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. It is a YA novel. Technically, I would say it's YA. Could be like older teen if you really wanted to. And it is about our main character, a 16-year-old trans boy named Benji, is on the run from a crazy evangelical eco-fascist cult. And he's desperately trying to find a way to escape the cult and keep the bioweapon that they have infected him with away from them. On his a planned escape, he ends up meeting a bunch of teens and young adults from a local LGBTQ plus center known as the ALC. And Benji starts to become friendly with them and begins to grow a lot of wonderful, meaningful relationships that he's never seen before and never had. Um, Growing up in a cult will do that to you. um, and it just follows his journey as he's trying to desperately escape from this nasty cult. Um, this book was pretty fast paced, I think. I think it was a lot of fun. Do be warned, there is some body horror elements, so if that's not your speed, I would skip this book because it is a little bit graphic sometimes on the depictions, but that's okay. Some people like that, some people don't. Um, and this is Andrew Joseph White's first book, I believe. He has a second book that just recently came out. And for a first book, I think this is a really, really good start to his career. I think he's got a lot of talent to him. I think he can do a lot, especially as a trans man himself. He can tell this story pretty well, I think. Um, yeah, so I guess we can get into our little non-spoilery thinking thoughts and reviews.
That part. I do really like this book. I think the premise is interesting, especially considering it's coming after the pandemic. So this he must have written during the pandemic, but this book was published post like peak pandemic. This was published in 2023, I believe. So it's an interesting concept because like plague and like virus apocalypse type content has been around forever, but it's interesting to see this take on it post pandemic with the whole cult aspect and the disease being portrayed as a thing of like cleansing the earth and like this is how we will fix things, um which is an intro again, like considering how people spoke about COVID and some of the effects of COVID, especially on um what's the word, um like population that was more susceptible to it and susceptible, um the population's more susceptible to being like having long-term effects from COVID. um it's interesting to me the way that the cult poses the virus and how they talk about it. um as for like the identity stuff and the trans stuff, I do like it. Feel like what's interesting is that parts of the book and parts of the messages and stuff feel like they're for a younger audience and other parts feel like they're for an older audience, and it creates like a strange juxtaposition between certain parts of the book that feels like they don't fit together 100%. um but I do like both ends of it. It just sometimes feels like there's like a gap there.
Yeah, I agree. It feels like we at the beginning, it is a young adult book at the end of the day, and it is more geared to, I think, the younger end of that audience, like older teens, just getting into 20s kind of adults. But there are bits and pieces that do feel like they're trying to speak to an older audience. And sometimes the pieces just don't fit exactly right how I would like them to. Um, that's okay. I don't think it happens a whole lot. I think he keeps it pretty consistent in making us aware that Benji is a 16-year-old child. At the end of the day, a lot of these characters in here are young teenagers and they're battling through this terrible fucking landscape um, as children, and all while dealing with, you know, figuring out their identities and who they are and what they would like to be. Benji specifically really trying to like come to grips with like his identity and his gender, and all while dealing with a cult on his back and being infected with this horrible virus, becoming a bioweapon for the cult's use. I always think during this book I thought like it's constantly reminded he's a child and this is a really fucked up situation for them. But then some of like the messaging would start to really lean more towards an older audience, and it was like, could we stick with the younger? I think the consistency there is a strength. um you don't always have to pull for an older audience. You can stick with a younger audience. I think younger audiences are intelligent and they can, you know, think critically and have the mindset to receive these messages. We don't always have to pull for like the older people. um but other than that, I think he did a pretty good job in the metaphors and messaging. I really like it. Especially, I appreciate all of the representation in these characters. They are all such fun, good characters. I kind of wish we got to see a little bit more of personalities from some of them, like a little bit more of a backstory from them, um, maybe a little bit more of interactions. But I know since a majority of this book is from Benji's POV, he feels very outsider, like he doesn't deserve to be in this place with these people because he views himself as a monster, because that's all the cult has ever fed into him. And I kind of wish we got to see Benji really kind of, what is it? What's the word? Get into like friendships with them and really, really get to know them more. They were kind of glossed over in terms of like their stories and who they were. Some got a little bit more light in the sun, like time in the sun, time to shine. But I would have liked to see a little bit more from everybody. I think they all had something to offer. Even some of the characters that take a little bit to grow on you, because there are a few. But other than that, I wish I got to see a little bit more. I would have liked to know them just a little bit more. Um, yeah, that's the whole plague and virus thing is incredibly interesting to look at, especially after the world has been through what it's been through. Um, and you know, a lot of the like the cult's thinkings and what they say sound so extreme, but after what this world has been through, it's frightening to realize how true and real some of this thinking is. Like how there are people out there who think these things, and it's pretty gnarly to come to that conclusion while reading this book. um, Especially giving political climates, the world health, and our actual climate as the Earth. It's wild to think about that this could be us in maybe like 20 years, because this book takes place after, I believe, 2038 or something. It's not that far in the future. This book takes place within our lifetimes, and that was kind of weird. I was like, whoa, what do you mean this is only like 2040? I'll be like 39. Hello. It was a really, really interesting story in that manner, I thought. Ugh, throat's dry. But you can imagine the cult is terrible. They're terrible people. The worst of the worst.
Yeah, it's I think because it's like not just they're they specifically lean into like almost televangelist kind of stuff. Like they talk about some of what like the leader of the cult was doing um prior to um like everything really going to shit, and talking about some of like there's like snippets from the cult supposed like website and stuff at the beginning of each chapter, and it does feel they are leaning into an evangelist or televangelist like fundamentalist kind of religion for the basis for the cult. So it's not even just like your run of the mill like there's no hate stronger than Christian love. Like, no, these people are genuinely like this is leaning into like Mormonism kind of territory, or you know that kind of like Jehovah's Witness type religions where there's like a lot of fanaticism and there's so many restrictions and there's a lot of like misogyny and racism and all these other things. And like that's the basis for the cult, and then you also add in the eco-fascism stuff where they think that this disease is somehow good because they're cleansing the earth of humans and all this stuff. And they're just the worst. Every single person from the cult is literally the worst. I guess we do kind of, I'm not going to get into who because that's spoiler territory, but we do kind of have like a singular, other than Benji, we have like a singular redeeming character from the cult. But otherwise, every single character we meet from the cult, even when they are quote unquote doing good or somehow helping our main character, they are still the worst.
Still, truly, wholeheartedly the worst. Rooting for nobody. Like, there is 0 point of redemption for a lot of like the people in the cult. And as there should be, terrible people, maybe they don't deserve redemption sometimes. I'm down for a redemption story when it's earned and deserved. These people don't deserve such a thing ever. But yeah, it's interesting though at the snippets of the beginnings, or at the beginning of chapters, having the insight of like prior to truly the world absolutely ending, like lead ups to it, and seeing little bits and pieces and snapshots from the chaos that was coming before everything went bad. Uh, um, I love Benji as a character. I love this boy. I love him so much. I love Benji. I love a good amount of characters in this book, but Benji, I just want to protect in every possible way. This poor boy doesn't deserve what has happened to him, and after the events of this book, I hope he's living a decent life. Considering the circumstances, I hope he's having a good time as best he can. He deserves it. He is only 16, so he's got a lot of time to live, I would hope. But him as a character, I liked being in Benji's head. I liked seeing the story through his eyes. And I liked the constant reminders of the religion and like how ingrained and deeply put into him that it is, and trying to compete with that and fight it off and know that that is all absolutely hysterical, beyond crazy thinking that he doesn't need to have anymore. Um, and I really liked his insights into who he was as a person, as well as like the people around him. Um, Especially considering the way he was raised and him thinking that he doesn't deserve certain things because of the things he's done and who he is. Um, I like how much he cares about the people around him. Um, and sometimes there's a little bit of foolishness, but that's okay because Benji is a child who's been brainwashed, so he can. I'll excuse a little bit of foolishness here and there. Um, it takes a while to break free from those things. Um, but other than that, I love Benji. I love him so much. He's so good. He's such a good character.
I also really like Benji. I think some of his, here's the thing, he is like speed running deconstruction. And like, yes, there is some deconstruction that happens prior to him actually leaving the cult through his father, and he talks a little bit about um like his dad bringing him like books and stuff or whatever. So like deconstruction was happening technically prior to him leaving the cult, but then he leaves the cult and he's on the run. So there's like, you're not fucking deconstructing while you're running from the cult that's trying to harm you. But when he gets to a place where he is like even slightly more safe, he is like speed running the deconstruction process. He is like speed running, unlearning a lot of things, unlearning a lot of things that have been ingrained in him. There's like a scene where somebody says God, but in the sense of like, God, this is stupid or something like that. And he has like a visceral reaction to it because he's so used to, if someone says something like that, it is immediately met with anger and possibly violence. Um, and he has never met other queer people prior to meeting the kids at the Alk that he meets in the book. And he has this reaction of like, oh, like this sense that this is normal for them and it's not for him. And he has to have like this kind of conversation with himself about the fact that this is normal for them. Like there's a conversation he has with Salvador where he asks them if they're trans, and it's an interesting interaction between the two of them because it truly is like Benji is complete. Even though Benji is trans, the idea of other trans people is like completely foreign to him.
Mm-hmm. It is a completely whole new world, um, for him to finally see and get into and be a part of. And this boy is trying to pick apart his religious trauma so fast while dealing with a bunch of other shit. Um, and poor guy, poor guy. Benji's been through too much, and I love him too much. Um, it's the whole of like him constantly like being so surprised, but also like, wow, y'all live like this? Like you can do this? I've never done such a thing. Wow. Like the part when somebody says, like, man, God, this is fucking stupid or whatever. And he's immediately like, they just took the Lord's name in vain and nobody's mad. What? I've never, that's crazy to me. Um, and I really like that some of the people at the ALC help him out and are very kind and welcoming to him, even with what they know about him. And um they are understanding of the fact of like what has happened to him is not his fault and he could not help it even if he wanted to, um which he did want to for a good like majority of time. I think anybody in a cult would want to get out of that. um but I like that a lot of them were very understanding to him and knew that he's never had a place like this. He's never had a place like this where he could be himself, truly wholeheartedly, just him as Benji, not like a big bioweapon that a cult is proclaiming is sent from God, not who he was prior to Benji. Um, and I like that they're just like, yeah, man, that's okay. We've all been there. Shit sucks. You might have it a little bit worse, but we're here for you and we understand. Um, though there are some people who do take a little time to warm up to Benji, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in the big spoiler section. But I like how these characters interact with him a lot. In the mentioning of the bioweapon stuff, I'd like to say I think Andrew Joseph White, yeah, that's right. Can't speak. I think he writes body horror pretty good. I'm a big horror connoisseur. I really like reading it. And I think he does a pretty good job of writing like pretty visceral descriptions while keeping it age appropriate, um, for this genre in particular. Um, I think he's got really cool descriptions of what's going on with Benji, with other things going on in the world. Um, he, I could feel it. Like it was the kind of thing that makes your skin crawl a little bit. And I think it was a really well done writing of that kind of material. Um, and I was having a blast. I was having a blast with all of those like big, crazy, messed up, gory, visceral kind of things. They are pretty prevalent throughout the book. Like, pretty quickly, right away, we're talking about blood and flesh and things of that nature. So it's not just like a one-off little thing. It is throughout. So you can't really avoid it a whole lot if that's not your vibe. But if you don't mind it and you do like it, you're gonna get a lot of it. You will get a lot of it throughout this book, start to finish. We're getting body horror up in here easily right away. And Andrew did a really good job, I think, in writing it, because it's slipping into gross territory for body horror is easy. You can slip too far into the nastiness of it, and it can become too much too fast. And I think he keeps a pretty good level on it, throughout, especially as things escalate throughout the story. I think he keeps it at a pretty steady pace. Um, he doesn't get way too gross too fast, way too upsetting too fast. Uh, and I like that. I like that as a horror person. It's fun. I think it's great. Um, yeah.
Honestly,
The
my only complaint writing wise with this book is that I think this is what I mean when I say like there's kind of mixed not messaging, but there's like mixed vibes on the audience of the book, because there are some themes of the book that are like aggressively hammered in, like too much sometimes. Like these are, you're very obvious with what you're trying to say, which I can appreciate. But it's like it doesn't leave too much room for nuance or for audience interpretation because you're just like laying it on real thick. But then there's other parts and other themes that aren't, they're being touched on but like not nearly as much. So there ends up being like a disconnect between, okay, is your audience so young that you have to lay on the themes this thick, or are they old enough to pick these up through subtext and all of this?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the body horror is well done. I think most of the language around the transness, not just of Benji but of everyone, is done fairly well. One of the main characters is autistic, and I think that was handled well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my only complaint writing wise is more of like a meta narrative thing with the theming of the book.
Yeah, it's very much he's hand feeding some stuff while also being like, you can figure this thing out on your own. And it's very, would you like us to just have it and you give it to us, or do you want us to figure it out? Um and yeah, that it's a little funky in some spots for sure. Like there's bits and pieces that feel um very juvenile, and I don't think that's a bad thing because younger audiences do need content too, and they need content that can talk about this kind of stuff. Um, and that they deserve it. Everyone deserves to have something for them. So having like a juvenile kind of writing is okay, but to swing back and forth between a more mature writing style for a more mature audience and the more juvenile stuff for the younger audience feels a little wonky on occasions. It doesn't blend very well completely. Um, so that's there to look out for. Other than that, I think story wise and the characters, I think they are it's a really good story, and I think it's a story that needs to be told. LGBTQ stories need to be told. Um, and having this kind of like very vast representation, I think, in terms of books that are pretty mainstream, um, the kind of representation in this book is nice to see. There is people of all genders, identities, backgrounds, the whole nine, and I think that's really nice. It's really, really nice to see, because mainstream books like this, you don't see it a whole lot. And as we continue to grow as a society, I hope we'll continue to see more of it. Um, but for now, there's not nearly enough. Um, so this was nice to read, and it was nice to see this story told. Um, because I remember I saw a little bit of an interview with Andrew, and him talking about why he wrote this book, especially after the pandemic and after the world kind of went to shit for us. Um, Watching the US government specifically start to become incredibly like hateful and transphobic and starting to really go backwards in beliefs and like the laws that are being passed. He wanted to write this book for the trans kids out there who want to fight and want this world to be better and have their place in it so they can be happy. Um, and I really appreciate that message. I really, really do. It's we need it. We need a story like this, like in this day and age specifically. So I liked reading it. I liked seeing all of this really nice representation, and I also kind of liked seeing a big fuck you to really extreme religious Christians specifically, things like that. I like seeing a big fuck you to them all the time. It's my favorite thing. um yeah, it's also pretty fast paced too, so I got through this book at a decent pace.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't drag, I don't think,
No,
which is nice.
it's pretty. it's the story beats are pretty well paced. I will say regarding like his take on writing the book, there is a letter from the author at the beginning of the book, at least in my copy. There is. Um, I will say the letter from the author has a trigger warning. This book contains depictions of graphic violence, transphobia, domestic and religious abuse, self injury, and attempted suicide. The rest of the letter, he says, if you set a fire, you're going to inhale some smoke. I'm all for setting fires and burning whatever will catch flame, but I encourage you to be careful when you pour the kerosene. He said the book is about survival. It's a book about queer kids at the end of the world trying to live long enough to grow up. It is a book about terrible things people do in the name of belief and privilege. So if any of the topics above will burn you, I respect your decision to step away. I wrote this book for a few reasons, because I wanted more stories about boys like me, because I was angry, because I still am, but mainly I wanted to show queer kids that they can walk through hell and come out alive, maybe not in one piece, maybe forever changed, but alive and worthy of love all the same. That's what you'll find here: terrible things, survival, love, and a future worth fighting for. Sharpen your teeth, take up your fire, and let's do this. Yours, Andrew. Which I think is interesting. You don't really see books with like a letter from the author at the beginning, and I guess that's pretty much his dedication, because this book doesn't have a typical dedication, which I also think is interesting. He it definitely reminds me of the Cemetery Boys, which I feel like is a similar sentiment from that author as well, of like, I wanted to tell stories about people like me, for people like me who don't have representation. And in this case, this feels like you go through the book and so much of it is like bad shit happening, but like ultimately the book is about hope, and that concept of hope outside of like the religious lens that we typically see it through, which I also think is interesting.
I agree. How did I forget about the letter at the beginning? So much happens in this book. I completely forgot about the letter. I really like that he wrote that. I like that he put that little letter in for the audience. I think it would be cool if more authors did that. Actually, I think that would be really, really nice and pretty sweet. The whole story is truly, at the end of the day, love, hope, and fighting for your future, and knowing that you deserve that future, you deserve that happiness that will come to you. And I really, really like that. It's very sweet. um in flipping through the pages of the book, completely also forgot to mention there are a couple POV switches throughout this book, and they might be a little bit jarring to you. They were a little jarring to me, because they switch from first person to third, but then they go back. It switches back and forth a lot. But for the majority of the book, we are with Benji, um, and that's from the first person POV. So it's not too much, but when it first comes up, you're like, well, this we were in first person, we're in third. When did we switch gears? All right, I guess. I do wonder if the third person POV switch was a purposeful storytelling tactic, especially considering the characters we switch to. I wonder if that was for a specific reason or just a stylistic choice.
I was gonna say, I feel like there must be like some thematic reason for it, because the two characters that we get POV switches for are the two quote unquote like romantic interests for Benji. And I wonder if that has something to do with it. It could also just be that like Benji is supposed to be the focus, and the POV switches are really just to add context to certain scenes and to, you know, give the audience some more context into these characters and like why Benji feels the way he does about them, especially one character in particular. So I don't know. It is jarring because I personally don't really care that much for I don't mind a point of view switch. What bothers me is when you switch like from first to third person and then back again. I think it can end up being a little confusing, and I feel like it kind of fucks with the pacing a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I have to imagine there's a thematic reason for it because the two characters that we get switched between are like again like the quote unquote romantic interest for Benji.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, it's a little. It can jar out your experience just a little bit, but it's you get back into it pretty quick, I think, especially once we switch back to Benji. Um, those POV switches do not last long. They are a chapter or two at most. And honestly, the chapters are pretty short. They are not long at all. So you come back out of it pretty quick. But even so, it's like a little like jolt in the storyline. Um, but other than that, I like the first person POV. I always like a first person POV. I like being in the head of the character. Um, so I'm always down for a first person. Third person's okay. It's fine. It gives a lot more like outsider detail, but I love hearing the thoughts of a character and seeing the world how they see it. Um, so Benji's parts were great. They were my favorite parts. Loved Benji's parts. Um, let's see. I don't know what else there is to really get into non-spoilery wise. You want to do like a little non-spoiler rating and little review? Then we can get into the nitty-gritty details.
Sure. I actually have this book rated on Goodreads. So let me pull that up actually.
So many tabs.
Oh, I'm just kidding. I don't have this rated on Goodreads. I would probably give it like a 4.
Yeah.
I think because I'm not like 100% the target audience for it, it does like lose some um oomph, I guess, for me. But the writing is good. I like the plot, I like the premise. There's some of that disjointedness, but there's not a ton of it. And it's good representation. I think Andrew Joseph White really did care about what he said and did with the book and with the characters. So I would say probably a 4.
I think I'd probably give it a 4 as well. I agree. I think Andrew really cares about this story. I think it means a lot to him, and you can tell in the care that he puts in these characters. But yeah, that little bits of disjointedness and the swinging back and forth between a more younger audience to a more mature one and back again kind of loses me a little bit. I think if he smoothed that out, I think he would be perfect. He would be a really, really great author. Um, I think he is a great author already, so I think he has a lot of potential. He's just got to smooth out who he wants to talk to and who he wants these messages to be for. Um, and I think I'm not the target audience by far. I'm not the age range that this is for. But I also think YA books and kids' books like that um, have a lot to offer. I think they do have a lot to give. So I don't mind that I'm not the target audience at all, because I think this book still has so much to give and so much to offer. Um, so yeah, I'd say about a 4 out of 5. I think what would make it a 5, smoothing out that little swinging back and forth messaging wise. Um, for me personally, getting to know some of the characters a little bit more would have absolutely bumped the score. Because I am a bitch who loves a backstory. Tell me all about it. I'd like to know. What happened? Who are you?
Real.
I want to see. But yeah, I think a 4 out of 5 is a pretty good rating for this book, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Now for the spoilery parts. I
Other
will say,
parts?
kind of adding on to that, I feel like we didn't. I feel like Nick as a character would have been more compelling had we gotten to know more about his familial background, because I feel like we don't really hear about it. We just know that he was in the cult. We know that he was one of the death squad people. We know that he knew who Theo was, but that I feel like we
Mm-hmm.
don't really know about like his role in the cult outside of that, or his parents' roles, or like how it went that Benji missed ever knowing him. Um,
Yeah,
like we know
yeah,
that these things are true. We know that they happened, but we don't have like a ton of background. I kind of wish we did.
I agree. I remember there's a point where like him and Benji are talking, and he's like, "Oh, my parents were nothing special, just a preacher and his wife." Um, and I mean, yeah, I guess I gathered this cult is probably massive, so like there's some people in there who are not like big names in it, but the fact that Benji kind of missed him ever, and it's constantly stated throughout this book of like Benji knows these people, knows these faces, has seen them a million times, but somehow didn't clock Nick, was kind of funky. I was like, wait, what do you mean you didn't know this? I guess like the constant wearing of the mask might have like made it harder for Benji. But there's points where he sees Nick without the mask, like when they're eating or other points. So it's that plot point feels a little funky that Benji didn't know who he was. I feel like he should have. Um,
Yeah, it's getting a little into plot hole territory. It just is very silly to me that like he I don't know. Did Nick at some point like kind of lies a little bit and says that they went to like Sunday school together or something?
mm-hmm.
And it's like so Nick clearly recognizes Benji. And I know Benji's got his own shit going on, but it's so strange that like he doesn't recognize him. So that's an odd, weird plot hole thing. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. With the emphasis Benji constantly makes of like, I know all these people. I've grown up with these people. I know them all. Yet you didn't know Nick, and he was there in the same squad of Theo, your quote betrothed bestie. Come on, King. We have more observation skills than that. I believe in you, Benji. Please, I know you've got your own stuff going on, but why is this surprising to you? That was funky. That was a little bump in the road for me.
Yeah.
Um,
And I will also say what I was talking about earlier with like the weird thematic stuff going on is that we get the cult is bad, fanatical religion is bad, transphobia is bad, like all of that stuff um is pretty like it's laid on pretty thick. But there is some other themes around like being transgender being inherent to who we are and not just like because of your assigned gender at birth. Like there's a scene towards the end where Benji talks about how this is so Benji the bioweapon physically changes what he looks like. That's what the body horror is that this disease fundamentally changes a lot of his biological aspects, and is turning him into what he refers to as Seraph, um, which is basically like a monster angel creature. Um, but what I find interesting is that there's a scene where they're still trying to marry Benji to Theo, and
yeah.
he talks about how even in this form, even when he's in a form that has no indications of male or female because he's literally a monster now, they will still view him as a female trapped in this monster's body. And they will, even in this sense, never recognize anything else other than that. Which I think is interesting, and like, these are themes that are very much like not as in your face, and like you kind of have to think about them. versus like the
Mhm.
religion stuff is very heavy-handed and kind of laid on thick.
Mhm. Yeah, that that scene in particular, I was like, okay, yeah, they're marrying you as a monster, and we're focusing on the fact that no matter what, they will inherently view you as a girl. Yet I feel like we had different things to worry about, but that part was just kind of like put in there for you to think about, and it wasn't explained a whole lot. Considering how heavy-handed, absolutely hand-fed the cult bad, don't do cult things, like, stuff is given to us. So that was a little bit of a rough patch. That was a weird scene. I was like, "What is happening here? What do you mean, marriage as a monster?
I
Hello."
also I just think that a lot of I think that there is a lot of theming around specifically Benji being trans that could have been like expanded upon so much more. Like
Mhm.
there's a point where he talks about how his dysphoria works, and for him it's less about his own body and more about the fact that other people perceive him as something he does not feel, which is so real. um and like that is not a way I've seen it explained very much before, but then it never gets expanded upon. Like there's
Mhm.
a couple other scenes where he talks about being dysphoric, but like that specific feeling is never expanded upon. And I feel like there is a lot of aspects of the trans stuff that is just not like explored enough.
Mhm. It feels like a missed opportunity to really get in depth with that, um, and really start to like make the audience think more so than just here you go. I feel like he could have done more with that, especially considering like the marriage scene, a couple other places. I think there could have been spots for it, um, but we didn't get that, and that is such a specific feeling in the media I've like read and consumed and seen. I've never heard of dysphoria feeling that way. Um, so I thought that was such an interesting like look on it that I hadn't seen before, and I kind of wanted to know more about it and get a better understanding, especially from Benji's point of view. But it didn't come, and I was like, wait, where is it? I wanted to know more. Come on. But yeah, there's little bits and pieces of messaging where I'm like, we could have done more here. I'm still hungry for more. My plate is empty, but I'd like some more. Um, especially more that we get to know Benji and like his thoughts. And once he meets all of the kids at the ALC and seeing them be open with their transness and their gender identities and who they are, I would have liked to have seen more of like Benji's processing and thinking instead of just absolutely speed running deconstruction. Granted, he kind of needed to do that too, but I feel like there could have been a bit of a balance that wasn't there. Um, on the note of the ALC kids, I love all of them except for a couple. A couple got under my skin because they wanted to be mean and rude to Benji for a while, but some of them redeemed themselves. But Erin, the leader of the ALC, she's great, incredible. I love her. I would hang out with her any day of the week. Um, Faith, I thought Faith was a really interesting character that I wanted to know more about her so bad. Because her and Benji have a conversation at some point in the book where he asks, "Do you believe in God?" Because she's wearing cross earrings and her name is Faith. And she says, "I think so," or something along the lines of that. She's like, "Yeah, I think so." Um, and she talks about how she had been looking into other religions and beliefs, to really, like, make sure and see if there was anything else out there that spoke to her. And I wanted to know more about her. She was apparently in the Coast Guard, and that's how she knows like a lot of like the fighting style or the weaponry use. And I wanted to know more about that girl so bad. I also wanted to know more about Aisha. She seemed so sweet, and I would have liked to know a little bit more about her background. I think they talk about her parents being doomsday preppers, and that's why she knows so much. But I would like to know like more about her, and not just like, oh, her parents were a doomsday prepper. I want to know about her. Um, and seeing her relationship kind of in the background with Faith as a friend, and I believe it's pronounced Sadaf. I might be
I
mispronouncing that.
think so.
Apologize if I am.
That sounds right to me.
Seeing her relationship with Sadaf Bloom was really, really sweet. I would have liked to see a little bit more of them there. Um, they, so many of them I wanted to see more. I wanted to know more about Nick. I wanted to know everything about that boy so bad. Him and his beaded lizards. I wanted to know everything about him. Loved him so much.
He's very interesting to me because usually when you hear about neurodivergent people, specifically in like heavy religious families or in like fundamentalist type of religions, there's a
Mhm.
lot of like, I don't know, they just usually, from what I've seen and what I've heard and people I've talked to, don't come across the same way Nick does. Like, I have friends who were very heavily into religion and are now not for whatever reason, and there's usually a lot of like humor around it, or some people have like religious OCD or like a lot of shame around it, and that kind of having to talk about that. And I think Nick does feel some shame, and I think he does hold some of the same like uh things that Benji holds, of like stuff that he just can't shake. But he also seems to like be very removed from it. And I also just wonder, like, again, what his time in the cult was like, because he's autistic, and like what that looked like for him, and like how he dealt with that, because he was also in the death squad, which was like the very like I can't think of the word, of like very strict, very like that's like the military aspect of the cult.
Mhm.
And I'm like, how did that work for you? And we never really get to hear about any of that, and I think it would have been interesting to hear about it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I wanted to know what, because you can see it a little bit when he's really starting to break. And he's like getting into a bit of meltdown territory. You can see him fighting himself, trying to keep it together, not be weak, hold it, be there for everybody else. Then we can go have our breakdown in private once everything else is dealt with. You see it a little bit, and I would have liked to know more of his insight. And the fact that we get POVs from him, but we really don't get to hear him a whole lot, makes me a little sad. Um, because there were opportunities there to do it, but we didn't get it. And I was like, man, I wanted to hear him. I wanted to know his thoughts. Um, Another character I wished we got any information about is Salvador. Salvador is so mysterious and vague. Like, Benji asks, hey, where'd you get those scars? What happened? And Salvador's like, I don't know. Wouldn't you like to know, weather boy? Salvador, please, can I have a crumb? A crumb of your backstory, a little bit of info? I can't remember any little thing we get about Salvador in terms of um their past
I
and
I
anything
can't
like that.
I can't really think of anything. I think a lot of it is just, I think the problem with the ALC kids is that a lot of what we get from them is like to push a found family narrative without giving a ton of their background. So like
Mhm.
all of them, it's very much like what we know about them is they care about their friends and like what and like how that looks, but we don't really know about them or their backgrounds. um
Yeah.
I think that's the problem, and Salvador is supposed to come off as mysterious. That's like their whole thing. So I don't know, it's a mixed bag. I will say, however, we talked a lot about characters that we wish we had heard more of. Let's talk about the characters that are actually the worst. And I think we should start with Theo. Why don't you tell us your thoughts about Theo?
Theo is a little bitch. Theo is a bitch. I hate him so much. From jump, the second Theo was talked about and mentioned, I was like, I don't like that. I don't like that. Because Benji is on the mindset and train of I'm engaged to Theo. I can't look at anyone else. I can't have a crush on anybody else because it would be wrong of me to do that to Theo. I still love Theo. This, that, and third. Then we come to find out Theo sucks and like physically harmed Benji like the day Benji decided to leave. Um and called Benji names and it was just really, really mean. And I was like, you suck, sir. Actually, I haven't even met you yet and I hate you. And then we meet Theo and he's like, I came back to get you. I wanted to be with you. I wanted to make sure you were safe. Blah blah blah. And I'm just like, I don't trust you immediately. Immediately.
It's giving
Um
womp womp. Why don't you cry about it? Like,
literally boo hoo. I don't care. I don't care. I don't like you, sir. Um but Benji not on the same train. Benji's like, "Oh my god, he came back for me. He really loves me. He cares." No, wrong. I understand why Benji has that mindset. Brainwashing will do that to you. Being in like any kind of tumultuous abusive relationship will do that to you. There's a point where is it there's a point where um Benji is talking to Theo and he says something along the lines of, I want him to touch me but then I don't. I want him to hold me but I don't want him anywhere near me. And I'm like, ooh, sweet, sweet summer child. That is classic, stuck in a terrible, terrible abusive relationship, circling the drain kind of notions. And it was it was rough watching Benji like absolutely trust him. There comes a point where Benji steals from the ALC like
oh
supplies
yeah.
that are limited and he steals from them to give it to fucking Theo. And I'm like, Benji, please. Benji, please. They are already on your ass. Bestie, what are you doing?
I mean, I think a lot of it is that, and I think that this is another one of those theming things that you kind of have to think about, is like, from what we know and from what we're told, the only two people in the cult who ever acknowledged the fact that Benji is trans was Theo and then Benji's father. And that was it. So I think to some degree, even though Theo was like an asshole at the end, I think to some degree, like, there is still some feeling of like indebtedness because Theo at least acknowledged it.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably part of why Benji still has an attachment to him even after the things that Theo did.
Yeah. Um and there comes a point where I was like, you know what? Maybe Theo's all right. You know, they're like they're in a church that um the ALC what's the word? I guess not ransacked, but like they ambushed the cult in this church, and that's where Theo shows up. So he stays in the church while Benji goes back and forth between ALC and then the church. and they're hanging out. They start to get a little touchy feely, and Benji and Theo are like, you know, being kind of cute, kind of nice. Um, there's a point where Theo says, "I put up with a lot for the sake of being into men," when Benji's talking about like the clothes he's wearing or something. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of sweet. And my tab immediately says, okay, Theo, you're doing well. Don't piss me off. And 2 pages later, not even, never mind, I've been pissed off because Theo was keeping Benji away from ALC so the cult could go burn it down. Like, I hate this man. I hate him in such a way. I don't like Theo. He's a little bitch. And towards the end, especially once Benji really transforms into Seraph, he's just like giddy with absolute glee. Meanwhile, Benji is having his body absolutely contort into a different creature. And Theo's just like, oh my god, I get to be on the Death Squad again. I'm so excited. Like, this is all for you. It's because of you, Benji. I can't wait to show everybody how much I love you. Shut up, Theo. Shut up. I hate him. I don't like him so much.
Real.
He sucks.
What I think the book does well is like towards the end, because at some point, Theo also becomes like not a seraph because they call it something different. They call him Dominion. But he also gets like fucked up angel monstery, but like worse than
So much
Benji.
worse.
But what I find interesting is that like the scenes that we get at the end where Benji is like trying to take control of the flood back from him is we get these moments of like remembering that like Theo is also kind of a kid. Theo is also just like, somebody who was affected by this cult, who probably is queer, who there is still like some level of sympathy that the book offers him, even though like, yeah, he is terrible. He's kind of the worst. And I think that's also where like we don't really get this theme explored enough is like the adults in this book and how there's not a single good adult. Like they're
No,
all
never.
out to use these kids for their own gain, and how that reflects today's world, especially when it comes to queer youth and the way that certain things are politicized. But like the adults on both sides, even like the quote unquote good adults who are not part of the cult, suck.
Fuck the Vanguard. I wrote it multiple times in this fucking book. Fuck the Vanguard. They suck. What do you mean you're making children do dirty work? How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? I thought, where did it go? On the notion of the body horror and the things that happen, I love the little Grace. I love the Graces. I love them so much. I don't care that they're big monstrosities. They are adorable. And the way they interact with Benji, because Benji can talk to them and like make them know that they're safe and like, ask them to do things like attack or help, save people. It's so cute. It's adorable for no reason. I love my little body horror pets. I love them so much. They were precious. There's a point where like there's Theo and Benji once again are sitting in the church, and Benji's talking to Theo about what happened, why you got removed from the Death Squad in the first place, and a Grace in the church is just like holding Benji's hand, just hanging out, and I love that. And there's a scene at the end after everything is done, the big fight's over, and Benji has defeated Theo and like the Dominion. And Benji feels bad because at the end of the day, Theo was a kid like he was, like you said, and probably a queer kid of some kind. And so Benji reaches in and takes out a little Grace from Theo's body and is like, what do you want to do? You can do whatever you want. Make your choice. This is for you. And the Grace chooses to stay with Benji. And I think it's so cute. And there's a scene where Faith picks it up and is like, oh, look at you. You're such an ugly little thing, aren't you? I love you. And they're so sweet. I didn't know you could make big, fucked up, fleshy monsters cute, but Andrew did it. He did it. I loved them. They were so adorable.
I think a lot of it has to do with like the sympathy and the empathy that Benji holds for other people that is lacking with the cult. Like, the cult doesn't feel empathy for people outside of them. Even, they don't even feel empathy for people in their cult.
Yeah.
So I feel like Benji's relationship with the Graces is a reflection of the empathy that he is able to hold for other people, despite the environment that he grew up in.
Yeah. It's really sweet. I really like any of the scenes with Benji and a Grace. I think it's cute. I love them. What else? Nick and Benji, the way their friendship and possible relationship grows is really nice. There's a point where we get a Nick POV and he's calling Benji it, and he's calling Benji only Seraph, not his actual name. And he's talking to Aaron about it, and Aaron's like, you and him are a lot alike, and you need to see that. And Nick is like, I can't see that because if I see it, then I won't be able to do anything if, for whatever reason, Benji turns on them and uses Seraph against them. And eventually Nick comes to the conclusion it's absolutely true and right. Benji and him are very similar, especially in background and who they are. And I really like how they interact. I think they're super, super sweet, especially after the fire when ALC is burned. Nick taking care of Benji and taking care of his wounds and, you know, making sure he's okay. When Benji is feeling so much guilt because Benji thinks that it's his fault that ALC burned, that he brought the cult to them. And, you know, he wouldn't take anybody, like, trying to offer him help to, like, take care of his wounds or whatever. And Nick coming in to do it while Benji was asleep was so, so sweet and so nice. I really, really like Nick and Benji together. Even if it's just, like, in a friendship sense, I really like them. I do hope, though, after the events in this book, that they can have a nice little sweet romantic relationship, because they deserve it. They absolutely deserve it. They deserve some happiness in this world. And there's a point where, like, Nick reveals that he was in the cult too, and they're talking about, like, a teacher that was at the Sunday school, and they're like, do you remember this bitch? And they're like, yeah, no, she was the fucking worst. And it was sweet to see Nick's guard kind of come down, because up until then, guard has been up, walls higher than high for Nick, especially towards Benji. And hearing him laugh and, like, seeing him be happy and talk with Benji like that finally was really, really nice to see. I really like it. The scene where Benji's like, you know, I'd like to kiss you, and Nick's like, what do you mean? Why would you want to do that? He's so real. He's so real. He's so real for that. But there comes a point where Theo is talking about, like, why he was kicked out of a death squad. And he's like, yeah, some dude in my squad just went rogue one day, killed everybody but me, and then left. And I was like, That sounds like dear old Nicholas. I'm fairly certain. And it was in fact dear old Nicholas. It was our boy. He ran off, and should he have probably killed Theo? Maybe. Maybe. But that's just me.
Maybe.
Maybe so. I don't know. Um, what else? The Vanguard, all of the adults, terrible. Terrible times. Hate all of them.
The one that got me was I think her name is Sister Kipling.
Yeah. The scientist.
Yeah, where there's like a moment where Benji is like, oh shit, she's a heretic. Like, oh shit, she can help me. And I think she does to some degree, but also she still remains she still continues to be terrible.
Yeah.
So it's like any chance of redemption because of whatever small amount of help you provided goes out the window because you're still being terrible.
Yeah, you're still like running tests and doing the experiments and all that. Fuck you, lady. I don't. And there comes a point where she's like, I've made a mistake. Will you kill me? And Benji's like, oh, now we've made mistakes. Now you've turned me into an absolute flesh monstrosity with 6 wings out of my back. Now you've made a mistake? Bye. You don't get an easy way out here.
What's interesting is actually the only good adult in the book is Benji's dad, who dies before we even start the book.
Rip Benji's dad. We love an ally father. I wanted more of him. He deserved better. I'm sick that he died so quick.
I also think it's interesting that he chose to go the route of like the dad being the saving grace, because I feel like typically in a story like this, either dad is complicit or dad is worse. You know, he's like the worst one out of the two parents. So I find it interesting that, and again, it's one of those things where I kind of wish we had more information, because it's like his mother is absolutely batshit insane. She has a very high standing in the cult. She fully believes in Seraph. She fully believes that this is like Benji's fate or whatever. But obviously his dad did not feel the same way. That's why they ran together. So it makes me wonder like what that relationship looked like prior to the beginning of the book. And like how the fuck that played out. But yeah, he's the only adult character, who ever did jack shit for any child in this book. And they kill him off screen before the book even starts, which is crazy.
Literally, first page, immediately, dad's dead. And I'm like, what? You could have let him have like 5 minutes of screen time, please. He seems like the only decent human here in terms of adults. Rip dad. Especially because we get little bits and pieces from Benji where he talks about like his dad would sneak him books and let him like, you know, read and learn stuff. His dad helped him cut his hair. The second Benji said, I'm a boy, dad was like, damn right you are, damn straight. You are a man, and you have fought to be a man, and you will always be a man. And I wanted to see more of dad. I wanted to see at least like a little bit of flashback, at least something.
Yeah. My biggest thing again was like the relationships that his dad must have had with like what was his father's relationship like with Theo? What was the relationship between his mom and his dad? What was what did all that look like? Especially again because his mom is batshit. She's like the worst one out of all of them, as far as the adults go. Cause like what the fuck was she doing? So yeah, I wish we'd had more of him, at least in the sense of like I wish Benji had talked more about his relationship with his mom, like his dad's relationship with his mom. Is what I mean.
Yeah, a huge agree. I would have liked to see, because there's a point where we see a picture of Benji, his mom, and his dad when he's a baby at the cult, and he talks about how happy they look and young and like full of life. And I really would be interested to hear how his mom got to the absolute insanity that she is now. like, what the fuck happened? Um, and especially to get the high standing that she has as like the Reverend Mother, that's what they call her. Um, to get that high of a standing, I guess you gotta do there's gotta be something like important about her. I guess, you know, your kid being the infamous bioweapon that's gonna cleanse the earth might be enough, but still, I'd like to know a little bit more about mom and the absolute insanity that is that woman. Um, and all of the like other cult members we see suck. They're all terrible, every single one of them. And they all die pretty quickly, which is really nice. They don't last long. Like when they appear, they're probably dead by the like 2 pages later, and that's really nice. I appreciate that. Don't make me sit around and listen to this shit. Because the parts of the book for me that dragged the most, this book doesn't drag very much, but the parts that dragged for me personally is when the cultists started talking their religious bullshit. I've never been a churchgoer in my life, so like the preaching and all of that has always been boring to me. And so when the cultists really start going and they don't shut up, I'm just like, okay, where's the bullet? Like where's the gunfire? Where's the grace to rip them apart? I'm ready. I've heard enough. Yes, you believe that genocide is the right option to cleanse the earth. Woohoo! I don't care. You're terrible. I'd like this to be over quickly, please. And usually it is. However, I don't mind, shockingly, all of the references to the Bible, like all of the passages and stuff like that. I don't mind those at all. But when people start talking about God and religion, then I'm like, okay, snooze fest. Which is an interesting thing for me. I find that funny.
I mean, I think a lot
But
of that has to do with like usually when we're seeing passages from like direct passages, it's because it's something Benji is thinking about,
mm-hmm.
and I think that that is supposed to be kind of a reflection of the fact that a lot of religious groups twist the words of the Bible to mean what
Mm-hmm.
they want it to mean, versus Benji, who is just thinking purely about the passages on their own as like an isolated piece of text. And so I think that's why the quotes and the passages are not as like severe or like annoying
Mm-hmm.
as when like the cultists start to talk, because it's like directly taking and just thinking about the text versus whatever fucking bullshit the cultists are spewing now.
Yeah. There's a part in this book that I find so funny. This cult is so fucking strict. In every way you could be strict, this cult is that. And yet, we get to a point where we meet Benji's mom, and he's like, "Oh, mom, she looks beautiful, covered in tattoos." And I'm like, "Y'all allow tattoos here?" I feel like and the fact of like the wings being tattoos, like that's really interesting because a lot of like religious and Christian like people, especially extremists like this, are so severely against tattoos. I was surprised that that was okay and that was done by them. Um, Found that interesting. It was a little like nitpick. I don't even want to call it a nitpick, but I was like, y'all allow that? Funky,
I feel like
interesting.
the cult is very like flesh focused, which sounds
Mhm.
gross, but it's the truth. Like they string up corpses and like the graces are a direct result of the flood and like the way they treat the graces, and even in the sense of like the Vanguard has the ALC kids bring them the ears of dead Death Squad members as proof that they're killing them in return for food. Again,
Yeah.
like this very weird like theme of like flesh, and even with Benji's like transformation of the Seraph, It's all very like flesh focused, which I feel like is where the tattoo thing comes from, but it
Mm,
is very interesting to see.
yeah. I was like, y'all are strict in every sense of the word, but tattoos are okay? Okay. All right. I guess. Not a big thing at all in terms of like, overarching, but it was a little thing I was like, huh. Because they had talked about Death Squad members get those wings tattooed on them, and it's like really painful. Um, which, y'all, they must be digging that tattoo gun into their backs. Oh my god. If it's that painful, they're digging that thing into their skin. Um, but I had seen that and it hadn't registered to me that like they were doing tattoos um until Benji's mom came out and she was like covered in like biblical tattoos and like Genesis and all that. And I was like, wait, wait a minute. That's okay. I would have thought y'all would have hated that, but all right.
I mean, it
Um
is interesting considering like there's a scene earlier where um I think Nick is helping Benji put like bobby pins in his hair, and he's like obviously standing close to him to put the bobby pins in, and Benji says something about like how it's so strange because that kind of like closeness and touching premarital is like not okay in the cult. And it's like
mhm.
all this man is doing is putting bobby pins in your hair. You need to calm down actually.
Like, please like take a breath. It's okay. It's just bobby pins. Benji not knowing how to put bobby pins in his hair was so silly, and so funny. It's like you sweet,
He's
sweet
so
boy.
real for that.
I love him. Listen, hair is hard. I understand. He gets it. Um, especially I can imagine his haircut's probably pretty choppy. We're in the apocalypse. We're not going to the hairdresser. The hair's hard, especially newly short hair when he probably had like pretty long braids and stuff like that. Like really, really long hair in the cult. I can imagine it's hard to get used to that new feeling and how to figure it out and style it. So the bobby pins was really funny and very sweet because he mentions it multiple times of like the bobby pins keep slipping out, so I just take them out. And Nick's like, "Come here, dumbass! Like, just fix it."
Yeah.
That's how you do it. I love them. Um, couple places. I was not expecting this book to make me emotional, like as emotional as it did. I got like really teary eyed and kind of cried a little bit when the fire happened. And I was like, my besties better not be dead. Like, this is, I don't think I could handle that. Um, and where else did I get a little misty? A couple points of like Nick and Benji talking got me a little misty eyed. Um, there's a point where after Benji talks about how he would like to kiss Nick, and when he comes back from the mission, they'll talk about like their relationship and stuff. Nick and Benji do this really sweet little forehead touch, and that tiny little moment really, really made the eyes water. I was like, oh, that's so adorable and sweet. I love them so much. um, but the fire really got me. I was the devastation I felt wondering if like they would be okay and if any of like the main characters we've gotten to know had died. It was oof. And then when the Vanguard was like, we're not going to help you unless a month passes or you show us that you killed 20 of the cult members. When they just lost, like, I think it was like 4 or 5 people and their shelter and all of their supplies, pretty much. Fuck the Vanguard once again. Hate them. That got me pretty good in the little emotional feelings. So I was not expecting to be so emotionally affected
Mm-hmm.
um, in the way.
Yeah. I for me a lot of like the things that brought out big emotion for me had to do with um like again some of the way that Benji describes dysphoria and I think like the way that Benji interacts with Nick's boundaries that are a result of the autism are very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's the scene where going back to where Nick someone told Benji that Nick had been calling him an it, and when he goes to confront Nick, it's Nick almost immediately like no nonverbal, like can't talk. Um, and even in his anger, Benji is still like, I don't care if you say it out loud, like write it down, whatever you need to do. Um, and I just think it's interesting that they some of the ways that Benji interacts with those boundaries. And he picks up on it real quick on like what to and not to do when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to Nick. And like letting Nick initiate touch and like the forehead stuff. If you notice, it's almost always Nick, or it's always Nick that initiates any kind of touch. Um, and I think that's interesting too, the way that they interact that way.
Yeah, I'm glad Benji picked up on it so fast, and like nothing had to happen to result in like a big argument or blow up or anything of the sort, to where Benji's like, oh shit, I crossed the line. Ooh, I'm so sorry. I'll never do that again. I'm glad Benji just immediately was like, yeah, man. All right. Cool. Like, boundaries set. I won't fuck with them. You do what you need to do. I'll do what I need to do. Great. I really liked that. I didn't want Nick to be pushed in any kind of sort of way. And I'm glad to an extent he wasn't. The only times he was really pushed is because like they were in battle, like fighting the cult or whatever, or there's a scene where there's like a fight in the ALC that he has to break up real quick, and he gets like really overstimulated and overwhelmed by that. But other than that, in terms of like the people around him, they don't push him, and I'm really, really grateful that they didn't. Because a lot of times in media, when a character is autistic or neurodivergent in any sort of way, they get pushed a lot. And I hate seeing that. It gets under my skin. I don't like it. So Nick having his boundaries respected like that was really, really good to see. Um, and those hit hard for me as well. I was like, oh, I love them. They're actually good to each other. This is so nice. um, there's a lot of little funny moments in this book. There's a point where I believe Benji quite literally uses the term brain rot, and I thought that was really funny.
Love that for him.
I love that for him. And there's little bits and pieces that have humor. Like there's a point where Salvador is spilling everybody's tea. There is fucking spilling everybody's hot gossip, and I love that. Like, I think Salvador talks about like somebody going through half of the supply of antibiotics they had for at least like a month because they had sex with somebody who's not very clean, or say Cormac is a bottom, and just
I forgot about that.
just really funny stuff. Where like Erin had a crush on Nick before she found out that he was gay. And just little bits and pieces. I think the interactions between all the kids at the ALC have a lot of good-hearted humor to them, which is nice to lighten the load. This is a heavy story with like heavy things happening a lot of the time. So having little bits and pieces of funny haha time were really, really good to lighten the mood a little bit. And they were never misplaced. Like they never came in at a wrong time. They felt right. And they felt like, yeah, this is a time to laugh. Cool. And I love them. Can we talk about the specific character that feels like a dig at somebody?
Oh yeah, I only like vaguely remember this character, but when you brought it up, I was like, "You right?"
There's a character named Calvin who is a trans boy, who is the one who started a fight that Nick had to break up. Still don't know why that fight happened. They don't say why it happened. Calvin goes after Aisha and is calling her a liar for some reason, and we never hear why. He just started throwing hands and being mad. And then Benji goes and asks Salvador about Calvin. And Salvador's like, if he's not talking to you, you're getting off easy. He nearly beat the shit out of Aisha earlier, calling her a liar and a bunch of other stuff. He's the worst. Like, being a dick will make up for his lack of one. Let me guess what he was throwing a fit about. You're white, so... Oh, was it because you don't bind? And then Salvador says, look, he's awful. He bought into a bunch of gatekeeping rhetoric before that day, which is like Apocalypse Day. And all he does is lick boots. Said I was making a mockery of the trans movement for using, quote, fake pronouns, and I nearly strangled him. Pink-washed colonialism and all that. Feel free to deck him if you want. I'm sure Aisha would appreciate it. And that character and who he is specifically feels like a dig at a specific YouTuber that was pretty big in like the 2010s or something.
Yeah.
With a similar kind of rhetoric and not so nice belief system.
I
And I
mean,
was like,
let's just call it what it is. This character is clearly a dig at Calvin Gara, who, like Lucy said, was a popular YouTuber in like the mid 2010s, who was a trans medicalist and had beliefs that you have to be and experience and do certain things to be considered a quote unquote real trans person, and is one of the kind of trans people that thinks that gatekeeping within the community is cool and all this stuff. Looking back, I didn't pick up on that. Looking back, I'm like, yeah, this is clearly like a Calvin Gara insert character that Andrew put in here to like make fun of. Like, that's the only reason he exists, for real.
Down
like,
to the name.
Yeah, it's very apparent. And I think that's just so funny to me, because like Calvin Gara is like a scourge upon the earth, and he, especially at that time when he was popular, like just like literally the worst. So I think it's funny that he added in that dig of like, you have like, he's a trans man and he's saying all these things, like clearly this is meant to reflect something.
It's written on the walls, we could see it. I clocked that immediately. I was like, I haven't thought of the name Calvin Gara in so fucking long. I couldn't even remember his last name. I just knew his first name was Calvin, but I could see him in my mind's eye. I was like, I know who this is. I see who this dig is about. I see you, Andrew, and I respect you. I do, because Calvin Gara sucks. Not a nice person. And so that was really, really funny. A nice little drop in the story. I like that. Call him out, King. Do what you need to do. But I really liked this book. I liked all of them. I don't really... Oh, Cormac. I could talk about Cormac. Cormac irritated me at first. He slowly gained my approval. It took him a long time, but he gained the approval at some point. I think it was like before the big plan at the end, that he gained my approval, and he was like, yeah, okay, Benji, you're fine. But before that, he was like really mean to Benji and would constantly be like, I'm not going to work with him. He was the one who told Benji that Nick was calling him an it. And I was like, Cormac, I need you to calm the fuck down. Also, the fact that it was brought up a bunch that Cormac was a little rich boy before all this went down. And they keep making fun of him for it. I was like, that's so real. That's so... Put him in his place, please. There's a point at the beginning of a chapter where it literally talks about Cormac wearing designer boots. I'm like, you're in the Apocalypse, King. Designer boots. Please. Cormac,
Listen, you work with what you got.
I guess, sure, buddy. Shoes are shoes. But
He's
Cormac's
definitely,
slowly getting.
yeah, he's the one that is supposed to be like surly and doesn't like outsiders, but like by the end of it, he realizes that Benji's a good guy. Like that's his character. So like at the beginning, yeah, he kind of sucks, but there's characters in the book that suck far more.
Yeah, there's a lot worse in this world. Trust and believe. But Cormac, he's a little bit of an asshole in the beginning, but he gets better with time. Give him a little bit of grace. Get the pun? Haha.
Haha.
Give him a little bit of time. He'll get there. But in the beginning, I was like, Cormac, I need you to calm down. Actually, relax. It's not that big of a deal. But I can't recall any other big name characters that really mattered in terms of the story. We met like a couple kids at ALC very briefly. Like I think there's a girl named Carly. There's somebody named Alex. There's a point where Alex and Benji fight, and Benji didn't do anything wrong. Benji's never done anything wrong in his whole life. I will support him till the day I die. Except that mess with Theo, but that I'm willing to excuse. But Benji and Alex fight, and everybody's blaming Benji. But Alex got on him first. And I was like, Benji, sweet boy, you didn't do anything wrong. You've never done anything wrong. And just a couple other of the kids I would have liked to know a little bit more about. There's no big, massive deaths in this book. Which
There is a death towards the beginning, but it's not a character that we know very well.
Yeah, like Dad dies at the beginning, and then Theo dies eventually. But who fucking cares?
Well, there's a kid from the ALC who dies. That's what. So
Oh yeah.
there is a section of the ALC called the Watch, and they are the ones who go out to kill the Death Squad members, to get food, like all of that. And Benji ends up joining them because of the death of this kid. And I think it was the kid that he fought with that dies.
No,
No?
it was the partner of the kid who died.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is like a character death, but none of the main characters that make it through to the end die at any point.
Yeah. And I genuinely feel like Andrew could have pulled that. Like he absolutely could have pulled that kind of a gut punch. Especially with the fire. He could have pulled that kind of a gut punch. Personally, I'm a little glad he didn't. I feel like there's enough turmoil in this world. We don't need to add on to one of the characters we like dying. That would have sent me into an absolute spiral. I would have been so sad. Especially like the good ALC kids. Like had Aisha died, or Faith, or Sadaf, or Aaron, or Salvador, any of them, had they gone, I would have been really upset. So I'm glad he didn't pull that kind of a punch. I feel like it wouldn't have added a whole lot, just more turmoil. And another thing for the ALC kids to fucking handle and deal with and grieve. So I'm glad he didn't do that. Very glad. But other than that, there's just cult members, Theo. Fuck
That's
that guy.
pretty much it.
Yeah. That's just about it. And I'm glad. There's so much turmoil in this book, so much sad. And then so much horror with all of the body horror stuff. We didn't need more. Like big name deaths. I'm good. I'm good. Had he pulled that, his score probably would have been lower. But I'm glad he didn't.
Well, yeah. Overall, a pretty good read. I think it does lean a little young in some places, but generally, for the lack of representation we have, especially in lit, I think it's a good read. It's worth it to read. Yeah, I like it. I like the representation. Again, I have like a few qualms about some of the writing, but for the most part, it's a really good book.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. I think Andrew Joseph White has a nice career ahead of him if he continues to choose to write books. I think he's got clearly a lot of stories to tell, that he genuinely cares about, and wants to put out there. So I look forward to see what else he can do. He's got a second book out recently. The title is not coming to me at the moment, but honestly, I think I'd pick it up. I wouldn't mind.
The second book he has out right now is called The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, and
Mm-hmm,
he's currently working on a third book that I can't remember the name of.
mm-hmm. Um, so yeah, I absolutely would pick up another book by him again for sure. I really like the way he writes characters, and if he wants to continue like with a horror route, I think he does it well. So I wouldn't mind it. Would not mind it at all. Also, the covers of these books are very pretty. The covers of his books are really, really pretty. And I am, in fact, a slut for a pretty book cover. Um, so, all in all, this was a really fun read to have. I haven't really read anything like this before. So, it was nice to jump into this. It was a good time. Good time. The characters were great. Good representation, I think. And good insight into some stuff. Just maybe smooth out little writing styles here and there. I think it would be perfect. So yeah, I really liked Hell Followed With Us.
Yeah. That's it I think for this one.
Yeah, I don't
Uh
have anything else to say.
we don't have a book picked out really for next month, so just keep an eye out. We'll figure it out.
Yeah,
Um
we'll put an announcement somewhere. It is Pride Month, so we might do a little
Probably something gay.
something today, a little fun. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.